The message of death. The rain fell softly over the city of Corinna's people, washing away the dust of war, but not the pain. She stood by her small window, the gray sky reflecting in her silver eyes, her hands holding the last photo of her daughter, Lyra, the bright soldier who had left home 3 years ago to fight in the human Zerath war. That photo was taken the day she left, with her armor shining and her smile brave, the smile of someone who believed in honor, in peace, in a better tomorrow. Corinna had believed too, until the message arrived. It came at sunset, carried by a military drone that hovered near her door. The screen flickered, displaying an emblem she knew too well, the Zerath Defense Command. A cold voice said only a few words. "We regret to inform you that your daughter, Lieutenant Lyra Corinna, was lost during the Battle of Iridian Ridge." Then the screen went dark, leaving only the reflection of her own trembling face. The air left her lungs, the world around her blurred. The sound of the rain became distant, and she fell to her knees, clutching the photo against her chest. The next morning, the city of Valthera held its silence. Flags were lowered halfway, candles burned in windows, and every mother who had lost a child walked through the streets with heavy steps. Corinna walked too, though her feet barely felt the ground. She reached the memorial gate, where the names of the fallen were carved into silver stone. Her fingers traced the letters, searching, but her daughter's name was not there. Only empty space. Her heart whispered, maybe the list isn't complete yet. But deep down she feared the truth, that the silence meant finality. Weeks turned to months. The truce between humans and Zerath was signed, ending the war officially, but not in the hearts of the people. Corinna's neighbors whispered that peace with humans was a lie. They said the humans had destroyed Iridian Ridge with fire, leaving no survivors. Corinna listened in silence, her face calm, but her soul burning. At night, she would sit near the small flame of her lamp, holding Lyra's necklace, a small silver crystal, and whisper, "You promised you'd come home, my child." One evening, a convoy arrived from the Human Alliance, carrying supplies for rebuilding the ruined city. Their vehicles moved slowly through the narrow streets, engines humming low. The people watched them from a distance, some with anger, some with fear. Corinna stayed behind her door, peeking through the thin curtain. Among them walked a tall human in worn-out armor, his face hidden behind a visor, his steps slow as if carrying a great weight. For a moment, Corinna's heart felt strange. She didn't know that this man, far from home, carried something precious, something that would one day bring her world back to life. Later that night, there was a knock on her door. She opened it slightly and saw a young human courier holding a small sealed envelope. It was marked with the Human Alliance symbol and stamped, "For families of the fallen." Corinna froze, her throat tightening. She took the envelope with shaking hands, her eyes staring at the seal but unable to break it. The courier spoke softly. "It was recovered from Iridian Ridge, ma'am." Then he bowed and left into the rain. Corinna stood for a long time in the doorway, her heart beating like thunder. She placed the letter on her table and walked away, unable to open it. She feared the words inside would crush what little hope remained. For many nights, she stared at that envelope. Sometimes she reached for it, but every time her hand stopped halfway, she would whisper to herself, "If I do not open it, then maybe she is still alive." And so, the letter remained untouched. Dust gathered on it, but her hope never died completely. Hope, that strange, cruel light that flickers even in the darkest soul. Far away, on the burnt lands of Iridian Ridge, a human soldier named Captain Elias Vorn walked alone among the wreckage. His uniform torn, his body covered in ash, yet his arms held a small figure wrapped in thermal cloth. The scanners on his wrist blinked weakly, one faint heartbeat. He looked down at the girl he carried and whispered, "Stay with me, you're not done yet." The girl's breathing was shallow, her face pale under alien markings. Her name tag, half-burnt but still readable, said Lyra Corinna. Elias adjusted his grip, ignoring his pain, and began his long walk through fire and ruins. His comms were dead, the rescue ship far above, the ground beneath him trembling from distant explosions. But he kept walking, one step at a time, whispering to himself, "I'll get you home." Back on Valthera, Corinna sat near her window again, watching the same rain that had fallen the day she received the message. She closed her eyes and whispered, "If there is any mercy left in this universe, bring her back to me." And somewhere beyond the clouds, a human soldier kept that promise. And somewhere beyond the clouds, a human soldier kept that promise, carrying her daughter through storms, through darkness, through death itself. The rain fell harder. The candle beside her flickered, and the unopened letter lay silent on the table, holding secrets that would soon change everything. The survivor's journey. The wind screamed across the ruins of Iridian Ridge, carrying the dust of burned metal and shattered dreams. Captain Elias Vorn stumbled over the cracked ground, his boots sinking into ash, his breath heavy under the weight of both exhaustion and something far more fragile, the small alien girl in his arms. Her pulse was weak, her skin cold, yet every faint heartbeat kept him moving forward. He didn't know her name then. He didn't know her story, only that she was alive, and that was enough reason to fight against the dying world around him. The sky above was a strange color, part red, part black, still bleeding from the aftermath of the orbital strike. The battle had ended 2 days ago, but the land still burned with silent fire. All communications were dead, the air thick with radiation dust. Elias's suit was damaged, its oxygen filters flickering between red and yellow. He had only one directive now: get her out. He found an abandoned shelter carved into the cliffside, a half-collapsed military outpost once used by both humans and Zerath forces during the war. Inside, he laid her gently on a metal bench, wrapping her tighter in his cloak. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe, staring at her face. She couldn't be more than 16, her features soft and strange, eyes with faint silver patterns, hair like dark silk. He had seen her kind before, but never this close, never without fear or hatred between them. He removed his helmet, letting the stale air bite his skin. He reached for the emergency medkit, injecting her with a stabilizer meant for human soldiers, hoping it would work on her biology. The scanner beeped faintly, heartbeat stabilizing, still low, but steady. Elias smiled weakly, whispering, "You're a fighter, kid." Outside, thunder rolled over the ridge, shaking the shelter walls. He knew he couldn't stay here long. The storm carried acid rain, capable of burning through armor plates in minutes. He activated his damaged comms again, but the screen only blinked no signal. He cursed under his breath, then looked at the girl again. "All right, looks like it's just you and me." Hours passed. Elias tried to rest, but his mind was haunted by flashes of the war, the screams, the light, the endless orders. He remembered how the humans had bombed the Zerath command center, how the retaliation nearly destroyed both armies. And now, after all that death, here he was, saving one of them. He laughed bitterly. Funny world, huh? When the first drops of acid rain began to fall, Elias lifted the girl again, shielding her body under his armor. The path ahead was dangerous: sharp cliffs, broken vehicles, and twisted metal from fallen ships. He could barely see through the fog, only the faint glow of the distant human extraction beacon, a small light of hope, flickering weakly in the distance. Each step burned his legs, but he kept whispering to himself, "One more mile, one more." The girl stirred once, mumbling something in her alien tongue. Elias bent down, his voice gentle. "Hey, you're safe. Just hold on." Her hand twitched, gripping his armor weakly, and then she went silent again. That tiny gesture was enough to give him strength. He smiled behind his cracked helmet. "Yeah, that's it. Keep fighting." The storm grew worse, lightning splitting the sky, and acid rain sizzling against his armor. He wrapped her tighter, ignoring the pain as droplets burned through his gloves. He stumbled, fell to one knee, then rose again. The ground trembled from distant explosions, leftover mines still detonating randomly in the wasteland. He moved between wrecks of ships, scanning for supplies. At one point, he found a fallen Zerath banner tangled in metal. He paused, tearing a strip from it and tying it around the girl's wound to stop the bleeding. Even in war's ruin, compassion found a way to live. Night came slowly, the world lit by the dull glow of fire from ruined ships. Elias reached a small valley, a rare spot where the air was cleaner. He set the girl down and opened his last ration pack, melting the food with his field heater. He whispered, "Sorry, can't feed you yet, but you'll eat soon, I promise." He stared at the stars above, faint, covered by smoke, and wondered if anyone could see him, if anyone even knew he was alive. Then he looked at her again, this alien child who had no reason to trust him, no reason to survive. And he made a silent vow. I don't care what command says. I'm getting you home. Suddenly, his scanner blinked green, a weak signal from an old emergency satellite. He opened the channel, static filling the air. Through the noise, a voice replied. Vorn? Captain Vorn, is that you? Elias almost dropped the device, his heart racing. This is Vorn. I have a survivor. I repeat, I have a survivor, requesting extraction at coordinates. Static cut through again, the signal breaking. He shouted into the device. Do you hear me? She's alive. But the connection faded, leaving only silence. He looked down at her again, exhaustion pulling at his body. Her breathing had steadied, her skin warmer now. For the first time since the war ended, Elias felt something he hadn't in years. Hope. He leaned back against the cold wall and whispered softly. Rest now, kid. I'll carry you the rest of the way. Outside, the storm began to clear, and through the clouds, the first light of dawn broke over the ashes of the battlefield. Somewhere far away, a mother still cried for her lost daughter, believing she was gone forever. But out here, in the silence of ruins, a human soldier carried her child toward life, one painful step at a time. The universe, it seemed, had not finished writing their story yet. A mother's despair. Days turned into months, and months turned into years. Yet Karina still woke up every morning to the same sound. Silence. The kind of silence that echoes louder than war. Her world had changed since the end of the human-Zerath conflict. The streets once filled with soldiers were now lined with builders and traders. Humans walked the same markets now, exchanging words, not bullets. But none of it mattered to her. Because peace meant nothing when the one she loved most was gone. Her home had become a museum of memories. Lyra's armor still stood in the corner, polished every week though it would never be worn again. The medals she earned lay on the table beside the unopened letter, the one Karina still couldn't bring herself to read. Every night, she sat by the window, holding the silver necklace that once hung around her daughter's neck. She whispered to the stars, If you can hear me, my child, send me a sign. The neighbors pitied her at first, then grew quiet. Some whispered that grief had broken her mind. Others said she was cursed. The city had moved on, rebuilding schools, factories, and hopes. But Karina's house remained frozen in time. Even the flowers outside refused to bloom anymore, as if sharing her sorrow. Sometimes, she visited the memorial plaza, where the names of the fallen shimmered under sunlight. She searched for her daughter's name again and again, but it was still missing. It was as if Lyra had never existed. That emptiness cut deeper than death, because it meant no one even remembered. She placed a white flower near the wall each visit, whispering, Until they write your name, I'll keep coming. One day, while walking through the market, she overheard a group of human engineers talking near a stall. They were discussing a battle zone called Iridian Ridge. Karina froze when she heard the name, the place where her daughter was last seen. The humans spoke quietly, unaware she was listening. One of them said, You know, there were rumors. One of our soldiers carried a Zerath child through that wasteland. People thought he was mad. Another replied, Yeah, Captain Elias Vorn. Last seen near the ridge, never reported back. Karina's heart began to race, her breath trembling. A Zerath child? Could it be her Lyra? She tried to ask, but her voice broke. The words wouldn't come. By the time she gathered courage, the humans had already left, disappearing into the crowd. That night, Karina didn't sleep. She sat on the floor surrounded by Lyra's old belongings, her datapad, her medals, her letters. Each one carried a piece of her laughter, her dreams. She played an old recording, her daughter's voice echoing through the small room. Mom, don't worry, humans are not all bad. Some of them just lost their way like we did. Karina closed her eyes as tears ran down her cheeks. Her daughter had believed in peace, even when war tried to destroy it. And now, somewhere in the vast silence of the universe, a rumor had given her hope again. The next morning, she went to the communication bureau. Her hands shook as she filled out a request form. Inquiry on missing personnel, Interfaction Cooperation Wing. The clerk, a tired-looking human woman, took the form and nodded kindly. We'll see what we can find. Corinna waited for days, then weeks, but no reply came. Still, she returned every few days to ask, until even the clerks began to recognize her face. Please, she would say softly, just tell me if someone named Elias Vorn exists. They always gave the same answer. We're searching, ma'am. But she could tell by their tone, no one really expected to find him. Then one evening, as the twin moons rose above Valthera, a strange signal echoed across the open frequencies. It was faint, distorted, but the words were clear enough to freeze her in place. Medical transport inbound, one survivor, biological readings, Zerath origin. Her heart nearly stopped. She turned up the volume, her trembling fingers gripping the receiver. The voice repeated, recovery complete, survivor critical, arriving at Alliance Base 7. Corinna dropped to her knees, her breath caught between sob and prayer. Could it be her daughter? After all these years? She rushed outside, running through the quiet streets, her cloak flying in the cold night wind. The city lights blurred as she made her way toward the shuttle terminal. Her heart pounded with every step, fear and hope mixing into something unbearable. For the first time in years, she wasn't walking toward death, she was running toward life. People turned to watch as she passed, her eyes wide, her voice whispering, please, let it be her. When she reached the base gates, human guards stopped her. Identification, ma'am, one said, but before she could answer, the screen behind him lit up, showing the image of a young Zerath girl being carried off a medical ship by a wounded human soldier. Corinna froze, her breath leaving her completely. The girl's face was pale, her hair tangled, but there was no mistaking those silver eyes. Lyra. Corinna pressed her hands to her mouth, tears spilling freely. The guard looked at her, and then at the screen. Do you know her? Corinna could barely speak, but she whispered through shaking lips, she's my daughter. That night, the stars above Valthera seemed brighter. For a mother who had walked through years of grief had finally seen the light of hope again. And somewhere inside the medical bay, the heartbeat of her daughter grew stronger, guided by the will of a human who refused to give up. The march through fire. The sky above Iridian Ridge burned red. It was not the color of sunset, but of war's leftover fires still breathing through the smoke. Captain Elias Vorn could barely feel his legs anymore. His boots melted at the edges, his armor scarred by acid rain. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Because in his arms, the small alien girl, Lyra, was still alive. And as long as that faint heartbeat pulsed against his chest, he refused to fall. Every step felt like a lifetime. The wasteland stretched endlessly before him. Rivers of molten glass, broken ship hulls half buried in the ash. The air shimmered with heat, carrying whispers of ghosts that once screamed here. The human army had left weeks ago, the Zerath soldiers too, but the land still remembered. Elias was alone, walking through what felt like the grave of two entire species. His comms blinked with static, a small voice cutting through the noise for a second. Captain Vorn, if you can hear this, proceed to Sector 12, Extraction Point Alpha. Then silence again. He stared at the broken horizon where lightning cracked through the clouds. Sector 12 was at least 15 miles away. He laughed under his breath, dry and bitter. 15 miles through hell? Sure, easy. Then he looked down at the girl in his arms, her head resting weakly against his shoulder, and whispered, "You better be worth it, kid." But deep down he already knew she was. He didn't even know her name yet, but she had become the reason he was still alive. Somewhere inside his chest, beyond the duty, beyond the orders, something human had awoken again. The storm hit without warning. Wind howled like a living beast, tearing at his armor and skin. He ducked behind the ruins of a fallen transport ship, shielding Lyra with his own body. The acid rain hissed on his back, burning through the outer plates. The pain was sharp but distant. His nerves were half numb now, his focus only on keeping her safe. He whispered through clenched teeth, "Just a little more, just hold on." When the storm finally calmed, the world was quiet again. The silence after the chaos felt almost cruel. Elias stood, staggering, his strength almost gone, his water pack empty. He adjusted the cloth around Lyra's shoulders, tucking it gently, as if she were his own child. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Her pulse faint, yet stubborn, just like his. He smiled weakly. Guess we're both too stupid to die, huh? He found a broken crawler nearby, its front half buried under debris. Inside, the emergency lights still flickered dimly. He entered, forcing the door open with his shoulder, and laid Lyra on the cleanest spot he could find. Then he checked the fuel cell, enough for one flare, maybe two. He fired one into the sky, the red light shooting upward through the clouds. It wasn't much, but it was hope. And hope was the only thing keeping him standing. He tried the radio again. Command, this is Captain Elias Vorn, Human Sector, requesting immediate evac. Repeat, I have a living survivor, Zerath species, coordinates transmitting. The screen glitched, the signal weak. But then, faintly, a voice came back. Vorn, you're alive? What do you mean, survivor? He almost smiled, exhausted. Yes, a child, from the other side. She's still breathing. I'm bringing her in. Static filled the air, followed by words that cut like a blade. Negative, Captain, leave the body. Extraction is for human personnel only. Elias froze, his hand tightening around the radio. He stared at Lyra's pale face, her chest rising weakly with each breath. He pressed the radio again, his voice sharp. Say that again. The voice repeated coldly. Human personnel only. Captain, do not bring the alien. Elias closed his eyes, his jaw clenching. He whispered, almost to himself, not alien, not anymore. He shut off the comm, slamming it against the metal wall until it shattered. Then he turned toward the door, pulling Lyra close once more. His armor beeped warnings, radiation levels rising, oxygen nearly gone. He ignored them all, stepping out into the storm again. His vision blurred, but he kept walking toward the extraction beacon in the distance. One step, then another, the world fading behind him in shades of fire and ash. When his knees finally gave out, he fell hard. The girl still clutched to his chest. He tried to rise, but his strength betrayed him. He looked up. The beacon shimmered faintly only a few hundred meters away. He laughed weakly, so close. His breath came in ragged gasps, the air too thin, his armor alarms screaming. He looked at her again, brushing her cheek with a trembling hand. Hey, wake up. You're almost home. Then, as his vision began to fade, a light cut through the clouds. The roar of engines filled the air, the sound of a rescue craft breaking through the storm. Elias tried to lift his hand, but he couldn't. The ship descended, voices shouting through the haze. He smiled faintly, his voice barely a whisper. Told you I'd get you home. The medics rushed out, pulling both of them inside. As the hatch closed and the engines lifted, Elias felt a small, warm hand grip his armor weakly. Lyra's eyes opened just enough for her to see the man who had carried her through hell. Her lips moved, but no sound came. He smiled again, eyes closing slowly. And in that moment, as the ship rose through the clouds, the fire below began to fade. The war was finally over, not because of treaties, not because of orders, but because one human chose compassion over command. The return. The medical base on Valthera buzzed with quiet urgency. Rows of lights glowed pale blue across the white corridors, the air filled with the soft hum of machines. Doctors, both human and Zerath, moved together under the same roof, something that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. War had ended, but wounds still lingered, some on bodies, some in hearts. Karina stood at the entrance of the recovery wing, her hands trembling. She had not slept for 2 nights, not since she heard that strange broadcast, one survivor of Zerath origin. Her heart refused to rest until she saw the truth with her own eyes. A young human nurse guided her forward gently, whispering, "She's in Ward 7, second bed." Karina could barely breathe, every step echoing like thunder in her chest. When she entered the room, time seemed to stop. Rows of beds lined the walls, some filled with wounded soldiers, human and alien alike. And there, near the far window, under the soft light of morning, lay a girl wrapped in white sheets. Karina's eyes widened, her heart skipped a beat. The face was thinner, pale, marked by scars, but the silver patterns on her cheeks, they were the same. "Lyra," she whispered, the word breaking like glass in her throat. She moved forward slowly, afraid that if she ran, the vision might vanish like a dream. When she reached the bedside, her knees gave way. She fell beside her daughter, tears flowing freely down her face. Her shaking hands touched Lyra's hair, her cheek, the soft rhythm of her pulse beneath her fingers. It was real. Her child was alive. For a long time, Corinna couldn't speak. She only wept, holding Lyra's hand to her heart, whispering, "You came back, my little star. You came back to me." A soft sound came from behind her, footsteps, slow and heavy. She turned and saw him, the human who had carried her daughter through the storm. Captain Elias Vorn, pale and bandaged, leaning slightly on a cane, his face drawn but his eyes calm. He stood at the doorway, unsure if he should speak. Corinna looked at him, her expression torn between disbelief and awe. For a moment, no words passed between them, only the silence of understanding. Then she whispered, her voice trembling, "You saved her." Elias nodded slowly, his voice hoarse. "She wouldn't give up, neither could I." Corinna rose and faced him fully, her eyes wet with tears. "You crossed the fire for her," she said softly, "even when your own people told you not to." He looked away, the memory heavy in his chest. "I just did what was right," he murmured. "No one deserved to die alone out there." The nurse returned quietly with a datapad, giving Corinna the official report. Recovered survivor from Iridian Ridge, delivered by Captain Elias Vorn under extreme conditions. At the bottom was a note, written in Elias's own hand. She kept whispering her mother's name. Corinna traced the words with her finger, tears falling again. "Even near death," she whispered, "she remembered me." Lyra stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. Her voice was weak, barely a breath. "Mom?" Corinna gasped, leaning closer. "I'm here, my love. I'm here." Lyra's eyes moved slowly, catching the sight of the man standing behind her mother. Her lips curved faintly. "The human, he carried me." Elias smiled gently, his voice quiet. "Welcome back, soldier." Lyra blinked, a single tear slipping from her eye. "You didn't leave me." He shook his head. "Couldn't, not after what you said." Corinna looked between them, confused. What did she say? Elias hesitated, then whispered. She said, "My mother is waiting." The room fell silent again. Corinna's hands tightened around her daughter's. Elias turned to leave, but Corinna stopped him, her voice firm yet gentle. "Wait." He looked back, and she stepped closer, placing her hand on his arm. "You didn't just save my child," she said, her voice trembling. "You saved what little faith I had left in this universe." Elias's throat tightened. He didn't know how to respond. So he simply nodded, eyes glistening. "She gave me faith too." The doctors said Lyra's recovery would take time, but her vitals were strong. Corinna stayed by her bedside day and night, holding her hand, feeding her, whispering stories of home. Sometimes, she would glance across the room and find Elias sitting quietly in the corner, reading from a small datapad. He never spoke much, never sought attention. But every time Lyra's condition improved, he smiled faintly, as if her strength was also his. A few days later, as the sun set across the horizon, Corinna found him outside the hospital, watching the sky. The twin moons reflected in his tired eyes. She stood beside him silently for a while, then said, "You're leaving soon, aren't you?" He nodded slowly. "Command wants me back on Earth." She hesitated, then reached into her pocket, pulling out Lyra's silver necklace. She placed it in his palm, her fingers closing around his hand. "She wanted you to have this," she said, "so you'll never forget what you carried." Elias looked down at it. The crystal shimmered faintly in the light. He whispered, "I'll never forget." For a long moment, they stood in silence, a human and an alien mother, once enemies, now bound by something far greater than war. As the night wind passed between them, Corinna whispered, "Thank you, Captain." He smiled softly. "No, thank you, for still believing that peace is worth fighting for." Above them, the sky of Valtheros shimmered with quiet stars. And inside the hospital room, Lyra slept peacefully, the rhythm of her heartbeat steady once again. The war had taken much, but tonight, it had returned something precious. Not victory, not conquest, but hope, the gift of peace. The sun rose softly over Valtheros' silver skyline, casting light through the hospital windows where Lyra lay resting. For the first time in years, Corinna woke to the sound of calm breathing beside her, the quiet rhythm of her daughter's heartbeat. The room smelled of medicine and morning air, but to her it smelled like life. Her little girl had come back from death itself, carried by a man who had once been her enemy. Days passed, and Lyra's strength returned slowly. Each morning, human and Zerath doctors checked her vitals, smiled, and said the same thing. She's healing faster than expected. Corinna would nod gratefully, though her eyes always filled with tears. Sometimes, when she brushed Lyra's hair, she whispered, "You have your father's spirit," and sometimes, "You have my stubborn heart." But the truth was, she had both, and something more. She had seen the face of humanity not as an enemy, but as a savior. Elias visited quietly, never staying long. He would stand at the doorway, hat in his hands, offering a shy nod. Lyra would smile faintly and lift her hand, her voice still weak but warm. "You came again." He would answer the same way every time. "Couldn't stay away from my favorite soldier." Then they'd share a small laugh, one born not from humor, but from shared survival. One evening, when the corridors were quiet and the stars outside glowed faintly pink, Elias sat beside Lyra's bed. She was stronger now, able to sit up, her silver eyes clearer than before. She asked softly, "Why did you save me, Captain?" "Your people said to leave me." Elias hesitated, his gaze distant. "Because when I looked at you," he said finally, "I didn't see an enemy. I saw someone's daughter, someone who deserved to go home." Lyra was silent for a long moment, then smiled. "You sound like my mother." He chuckled. "Then I suppose she raised you right." Corinna stood by the doorway, listening quietly, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. She realized something beautiful. War had taken their trust, but compassion had rebuilt it in one act of mercy. When Elias stood to leave, Lyra reached for her necklace, the one her mother had kept safe all these years. She held it out to him with trembling fingers. "This was mine, but now it belongs to you." He shook his head gently. "No, you should keep it." But she smiled, pressing it into his palm. "So you'll never forget that even in darkness, there was light." Word of their story spread through both worlds faster than fire. The Alliance Command released the official report. Human captain defied orders to save enemy child. And the people responded not with anger, but with awe. The image of Elias carrying Lyra through the storm became a symbol. It appeared in newspapers, murals, and digital archives across the stars. The caption beneath it read, "Compassion has no species." In the weeks that followed, peace meetings between humans and Zerath grew more frequent. Lyra herself became a voice of unity, speaking to young students and soldiers alike. She would say, "If one human can cross a battlefield to save one alien child, then maybe we can all cross the distance between our worlds." Her words touched thousands, because she spoke not from politics, but from truth. Corinna would often stand at the back of those gatherings, tears in her eyes, watching her daughter glow with strength and hope. Elias stayed on Valthera longer than he planned, assigned temporarily as liaison between the two forces. But in truth, everyone knew he stayed for them. For the girl who reminded him what humanity meant, and the mother who reminded him what forgiveness looked like. Sometimes, the three of them would share quiet dinners in the hospital garden. No uniforms, no rank, just laughter. Lyra would tease him about his accent. Corinna would scold him for skipping meals. And for a moment, they were not alien, not human, just family. One night, as they sat watching the twin moons rise, Lyra said softly, "Captain, when I was dying, I heard my mother's voice, calling me home." Elias looked up, his expression tender. "And you followed it." She nodded slowly, smiling. "Because I believed someone would carry me there." Corinna reached over, taking both their hands. And he did. Elias didn't answer. He just smiled, the quiet smile of a man who had walked through fire and found peace on the other side. Later, when he finally received orders to return to Earth, he came to say goodbye. The base was filled with soldiers saluting him, but his eyes searched only for them. Lyra stood tall now, in her new peacekeeper's uniform, the necklace missing from her neck, because it hung around his instead. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "Wherever you go, you'll carry a piece of Valthera." He smiled, "And you'll carry a piece of Earth." Corinna stepped forward and said softly, "You came here as a soldier, you leave as family." As the transport ship lifted into the sky, the people below waved, humans and Zerath together. And in that moment, something invisible but powerful passed between the two worlds. understanding. The kind that treaties could never write, but hearts could feel. Because sometimes, the greatest victories are not won on battlefields, but in the act of saving one life. And for the first time in centuries, Valthera and Earth shared the same sunrise. Different skies, different stars, but one shared light. The light of peace, carried by a human's heart and an alien child's hope. The monument of hope. Years passed, and the scars of war began to fade like old shadows under sunlight. Valthera changed, its skies clearer, its cities brighter, its people no longer whispering in fear when a human ship entered orbit. The world that once mourned its dead now spoke the language of peace. And at the heart of the capital, where the great plaza once held the memorials of fallen soldiers, a new monument stood. It was carved from stone and alloy. Two figures side by side, one human, one Zerath. The human carried a small child in his arms, the alien mother reaching toward them both. At the base of the statue, a single line was engraved in silver letters. Not of the same world, but of the same heart. People came from both planets to see it. Children stood in silence before it, their small fingers tracing the words. Old soldiers saluted, some with tears in their eyes. It was no longer just a story of survival. It had become a legend. The story of a soldier who carried a child through fire, and a mother who forgave the enemy who brought her home. Corinna still visited the monument every year, dressed in quiet gray robes. She would bring fresh flowers, placing them gently beneath the statue's feet. And each time, she would whisper the same words. You brought her home, human. Her voice was older now, softer, but filled with peace. Sometimes she would sit on the bench nearby, watching as the next generation of humans and Zerath played together, their laughter echoing across the square. It was a sound that once would have been impossible, but now it was the rhythm of a healed world. Lyra grew into a woman of strength and purpose. Her story became the bridge that united two civilizations. She joined the Interplanetary Council, speaking for both species, reminding leaders that peace was not a treaty, but a choice repeated every day. When she spoke before the assembly, her words carried quiet power. We are living proof that compassion outlives war. And every time she said it, the room fell silent, because everyone knew the truth of it. One day, many years later, a human ship arrived from Earth, its hull marked with the old Alliance emblem. From it stepped a group of officers, carrying a small silver case. They asked for Lyra by name. When she arrived, they saluted her, not as an alien, but as a comrade. Inside the case was something precious. Captain Elias Vorn's service medal, his personal logbook, and a small crystal necklace wrapped in velvet. Lyra's breath caught when she saw it. She touched the necklace with shaking hands, whispering, "He kept it all these years." The officer beside her said softly, "He wanted this to return to you when he could not." Lyra closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. She lifted the necklace and placed it around her neck once more, feeling its familiar weight against her heart. "He carried me once," she said quietly. "Now I will carry his memory." That evening, she visited the monument with her mother. The plaza was empty, the air calm and golden under the setting sun. She knelt at the base of the statue, placing the necklace there for a moment, the crystal catching the last light of day. Corinna stood beside her, her hand resting gently on her daughter's shoulder. They said nothing. They didn't need to, because the silence between them was full of everything that had ever mattered: love, loss, and the miracle of being found again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the monument lights came on, illuminating the figures in warm glow. The human's face shone with quiet resolve, the mother's expression filled with faith, the child cradled between them sleeping peacefully. It was not a monument to victory, nor to heroes. It was a monument to kindness. To one human who saw beyond borders. To one child who lived to remind the stars what compassion means. And to one mother who chose forgiveness over vengeance. Later that night, as Corinna and Lyra walked away from the plaza, the stars shimmered across the black sky. Lyra looked up and whispered, "Do you think he can see us?" Corinna smiled gently. "Of course he can, child. He's among the stars now, carrying others home." They walked hand in hand, their silhouettes fading into the soft glow of the city lights. And somewhere far beyond, among distant worlds and quiet constellations, Stories were told about the human who carried an alien child through fire and the mother who forgave him. Every world called it something different: the March of Mercy, the bond beyond species, the tale of the carried child. But wherever it was told, the ending was always the same. That compassion is humanity's greatest strength. That love can cross the boundaries of stars. And that one act of mercy can change the fate of galaxies. The wind passed softly through the plaza that night, moving the flowers at the base of the monument. And for a brief moment, under the silver light of Valthara's moons, it felt as if the statue itself breathed, alive with the memory of two hearts that refused to hate. A soldier's promise kept forever, a mother's hope fulfilled at last. And the universe, once divided by war, forever united by the courage of kindness.